And we are back with the fifth and the final segment of the GSMC Basketball Podcast presented by the GSMC Sports Network. And in this final segment, I'm going to be explaining the second apron and exactly what that is and, just do a better job than what I normally did. And because I only really briefly covered it. And so I want to have a whole segment dedicated to it. So, in short, the second apron is meant to prevent teams from creating super teams, right? This was a big problem when Golden State had Kevin Durant on the roster. They added Kevin Durant on an already overpowered team and a ridiculously stacked team with a team that went 73-9 without Kevin Durant. So ever since then, a lot of teams, they really don't want this to Adam Silver didn't want this to be a trend. And they didn't want so many other teams to just, build these kind of super teams. And this second apron is meant to prevent that. How does it prevent that? I'll go ahead and I'll explain with this article, right? And I'll also, just sum it up a little bit in case some people have a little difficulty understanding. So, unlike the NFL and the NHL, there is no hard salary cap for NBA teams. Now, most teams actually spend each season over the soft cap because teams can exceed the limit to re-sign their own players and sign recent draft picks and minimum contract players. So it's like there's a thought process in the NBA, well, not really a thought process, but there's a belief amongst the fans that the salary cap doesn't exist because there are so many teams that go over the salary cap and nothing happens, right? Now, this sort of punishes teams that end up going above the salary cap. So, there's a luxury tax system to punish teams that go too far over the cap, and a repeater tax designed to punish teams that exceed the tax threshold, approximately 121.5% of the salary cap, in 3 out of 4 years. So, essentially, the further you go into the tax and the more often you do so, you pay an increasingly higher penalty on every dollar spent. That's how a team like, 2023-2024 Warriors can end up paying nearly 177 million luxury tax payments despite only 42.5 million above the threshold. There's also various exceptions teams can use to sign players depending on whether they are taxpayers, non-taxpayers, over the cap, or have room under the salary cap. So, under the old CBA, teams that use certain exceptions or acquired a player via sign and trade were hard capped at a number called the apron. Now, the new CBA has 2 aprons. There's still ways for teams to hard cap themselves at one of the new aprons, but the real story is what happens to teams that can and do exceed either one of these aprons. So, for example, the 2024-2025 NBA spending levels, the salary cap is expected to be 140.588 million. Now, the tax level is expected to be 170.814 million. The first apron is 178.132 million, and the second apron is 188.931 million. So, what does that mean? Essentially, depending on how much you're spending on your team determines which sort of level in the NBA threshold you're at, which one of the levels you are. So, consider the minimum team 126 as the first level. Then the second level would be your salary cap. Then your tax level would be the 170. Then the first apron would be the next level, second apron would be the last level, right? So depending on how much you spend and on your team is dependent on where you'll end up on this level system. So the first apron is approximately 126.7% of the salary cap after applying the formula. Now, this comes with its own share of restrictions. Now, these are new restrictions. So teams that are in the first apron can no longer sign bought-out players who made more than the non-taxpayer mid-level exception, so roughly 12.8 million in 2024-2025. This, again, gets increased with the new NBA TV deal, so the number is going to change, right, before being waived, right? So that's one of the restrictions. Another thing that the first apron teams cannot do is they also can't take back more salary than they send out in trades. And they can't use trade exceptions that were created the season prior. So those are on top of needing to pay a lot more with, taxes and the tax levels. They also are restricted on doing certain things in the NBA and certain actions, right? Now, the second apron, this is approximately 134.4% of the salary cap. And this is the real game changer for a lot of things, and why a lot of teams try to avoid that second apron. So they have the first apron restrictions, and they also have other restrictions added onto that. So second apron teams, while not being able to following the things that first apron teams cannot do, they also can't use mid-level exception. They can't trade multiple players in the same deal. They can't sign and trade their own players to acquire others. And they also can't send out cash in any trades. So, and finally, teams that are above the second apron at the end of the regular season will have their first round draft pick 7 years out frozen so that it can't be used in any trades. The only way to unfreeze it would be to duck the second apron in at least 3 of the next 4 years. So there are a lot of restrictions for second apron teams. They can't even trade away any of their picks that they were to get, right? So, for example, if a team's above the second apron on the last day of the 2024-2025 season, its 2032 first rounder will be frozen. And the earliest the pick could be traded would be after the 2027-2028 season. However, if a team remains above the second apron in at least 2 of the 4 years after having its pick frozen, the frozen pick moves to the bottom of the first round, no matter how poorly the team performs. So this really could mess up a whole bunch of teams. The second apron could kill franchises. Now, the roster building restrictions are already crippling enough, but those delayed draft pick ramifications could be devastating for teams in the long run. So you can see why no one wants to cross that second apron now, other than teams reaping the benefits of surefire contention like the Boston Celtics. They're a team that's going to be well above the second apron, given how much money they're giving all of their players, right? Jason Tatum and Jaylen Brown making the most money. And obviously, that's something that they're not worried about, especially since the owners are going to be selling the Boston Celtics. I have no idea if I even talked about that, but they are considering selling the Boston Celtics for a lot of money because they don't want to get into that second apron. Now that this is I hope this sort of clears a lot of things up with this, second apron, NBA's taxes, luxury tax, this, that, and the other. Hopefully you guys have a better understanding of the second apron and what that entails. Let me know in the comments if you guys agree with this, if you guys like the second apron, if you don't like it. I personally love it. I think this is great for the NBA. This is desperately needed. They really needed this to finally happen, and it did, so that way it could prevent an overpowered and ridiculous team like the Golden State Warriors from ever being a thing ever again. Not a big fan of that. Was not a big fan of Kevin Durant on Golden State, mainly because it robbed LeBron of 2 championships. I don't, in my opinion, that Warriors team, if it didn't have Kevin Durant, and that move to Golden State didn't happen, LeBron would be sitting on 2 more rings right now. I am fully confident on that because there is no team in the history of basketball that was beating that Golden State team. There was none. 0. The Chicago Bulls weren't going to do it. The Phoenix Suns weren't going to do it. The Brooklyn Nets with Kevin Durant, Harden, and Kyrie, they weren't going to do it. what other legendary teams? The Miami Heat, when they had LeBron, they weren't going to do it. The San Antonio Spurs in 2014, they weren't going to do it. There's so many teams that I could just, every single team in the history of basketball that has won a championship is never beating that 2016-17 Golden State Warriors or that 2017-18 Golden State Warriors when they had Kevin Durant. Never. But aside from that, that is all I have for you guys on this segment, and therefore that is the end of the podcast. Thank you so much for tuning in to the GSMC Basketball Podcast, presented by the GSMC Sports Network. Your support means a lot to us, so remember to subscribe to the show, leave a positive review. It really does make a difference. We also invite you to follow us on Facebook, Twitter, TikTok, and Instagram for more content and updates. And as usual, please remember to use the link in the description to get your comments recognized, or the link displayed below the ticker on every show segment. That is gsmcpodcast.net. Really helps the show, makes it much more interactive between myself and you guys. That is all I have for you today. Thank you so much for tuning in. I am your host, Nelson, and have a wonderful weekend. And as always, take care.
Let's go. I wake up to a little bit of drool on my pillow, feel like it's gonna be a bad day. Yeah, I'm tired of shit, and the coffee ain't hit yet. Damn, ain't that great. I don't